highlighter, we got some definitions here that are kind of often a little bit confusing. Because in math, when you have the square root of 25, the answer is just 5. But if I was solving a question like x squared equals 25, which you get rid of the squared by square rooting both sides, you've learned you have to add the plus or minus, because minus 5 times minus 5 is 25, and positive 5 times 5 is 25. Both of those work. So in this case, you get 2 answers, but if you just start with just the square root, a square root always has just the positive answer. Which gets us into an interesting situation when we're square rooting with something squared inside. So I guess this whole thing with principal square root is important to put a highlighter box around that. And then we get this important idea at the bottom that if you have a square root inside, a square root of something squared, and that something squared is a variable, it has to be positive. So the number one mistake is the following, okay? Does it make sense that square rooting and squaring are opposites of each other? And when things are opposites of each other, you just like to cancel them out because they like undo each other. So the very common mistake here is people just say this is x. Okay? It looks, and you know what, for the most part, even if you were doing your work quickly, lots of university professors would just be like, okay, they're going along, maybe it doesn't matter in this situation. But if we had something like this, okay, and I just canceled the square root with the squared, I would get minus 3. But this idea of the principal square root, when you just do a square root, it is always positive. So if I actually do order of operations here, I should do negative 3 times negative 3. This is going to be the square root of 9, and the square root of 9 is positive 3, not negative 3. So we're not allowed to just cancel out the square root and the squared because they're opposite of each other's. Because in the end, it's going to be a positive number. So we solve that by adding absolute value bars around it. And this can be helpful, and we'll see in our next example here. So if we go to example 3, we can solve this quickly, or we can solve it a longer way. Quickly would look like this. Square root and a squared cancel each other out as long as the answer is positive. So I just make my answer in absolute value, cancel out the squared and the square root, and I get the absolute value of 7 minus 10, which is the absolute value of minus 3. So the answer is positive 3. The longer way to do this is to do each thing separately. So I would have 7 minus 10 minus 3 squared. Minus 3 squared would be positive 9. Positive 9 square root is 3. Doesn't even look that much longer. It could possibly be longer depending on how hard the mental math is to go about. So questions for practice on this idea that if you are square rooting something squared, we have to use the absolute value. Please circle questions 6, 10, and 11.